Where'd that come from?
That thing. It's recording. Go.
All right, guys, welcome to the Digital Barbell Podcast. Thanks for being here. Hope you're having a fantastic day wherever, whenever you're listening to this. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that this is another episode recorded from the camper. We are up in Austin. That is Lake something or other.
Lake Austin.
We were woken up this morning by people zipping up and down the lake, water skiing while the water was glassy. Pretty stinking awesome. A little bit jealous of those people, but we have a really cool episode for you today. We're going to dig into the points of performance on 10 different exercises that we see commonly messed up, for lack of a better term, and tell you how to fix those things. But before we get into that, you've got some good news from one of our clients.
Yes. This is from our client Bernie, who is one of our older clients. He's in his 70s, and he got some fantastic news from his doctor that we wanted to share. He's been training with Digital Barbell for about exactly a year this month. So he said, after training with Blakley for a year and eating a better diet with more protein thanks to learning from Jonathan's guidance, I am so happy to announce that for the first time in more than 30 years, my doctor just told me that I no longer have to take blood pressure medication. And then he said, he left a note. Here's the message I got from my doctor. I recommend that you stop your blood pressure medication completely, as you are now averaging on the lower side. As long as you maintain your current weight and keep exercising, you should not need this medication for a while. And then he went on to say, since starting with Digital Barbell, he has gotten stronger and dropped 10 pounds without a strict diet. And that got him off of this blood pressure medication that he had been taking for more than 30 years.
30 years?
That's incredible.
That is nuts.
So incredible.
Wow. And if you want to hear more of Bernie's story, he actually was on an episode of 5 Minutes with, maybe like the first one that we ever did. We'll put the link to that. That's on our YouTube channel, but I'll put the link to that in the notes for this episode.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm super proud of Bernie.
He is so fun to train, just because he's so positive, he's so consistent, and he's such a hard worker. And it's so cool to see that this hard work actually is like paying off for him.
I remember when he first started working with you, the challenge was to keep him from doing too much.
Yeah, it's still there. That's still the challenge. I'm like, I'll be like very strict notes. I was like, okay, today you are only doing this much.
Yeah.
He's training in 2 weeks. It's called like the senior games. And so, he's signed up, I think, for 4 or 5 events. And so we've already done like one practice through these events. And so, we're coming up, we're less than 2 weeks away now from the event. And so I'm like, okay, you can do like half the practice, but you can't do the full practice anymore.
You're deloading him.
Yeah. You don't need to go. We don't need to do it. So the one of the events is max bench presses in 60 seconds at a specified weight. So 75 pounds for the men. And so we've already practiced this once.
Yeah, I remember.
And he crushed it. I think I was going to have you try it. I don't remember if I ever had you try it.
I'd be so sore.
Not. I know. So that's why I don't want him to do the full thing. So I'll be like, okay, you can do 15 reps at 75 for time, and let's see how you do. But
yeah. Man, I hope he shares. I'm sure he'll share the results of how he does
I'm
with
so
you.
excited. There's some really fun events. It's like there's a rowing event. There's like a sled event.
That's right.
There's in the bench press. I mean, like they have their reps. They're like I'm like excited about this because they have legit rep standards in this competition too. Like the bench press has to be like touch your chest, and goes right along with what we're talking about today. Touch your chest, full extension of the arms, like push-ups, chest to deck.
Yeah,
I love it.
Cool.
And there's another one that's like goblet squats to a box target, but the box has to be set to where your hip crease is just below your knee crease. I'm like, these people know what they're doing.
Who's putting on this competition anyway? Yeah, and I guess last thing before we get into the topic is just welcome to new members that we have. We've had a lot of people start this week recording this.
Welcome to new members?
Welcome to our new members. We have a lot of new members that started.
I was like,
welcome, just you 2 new members. But yeah, I hope that everybody who becomes a member of Digital Barbell also listens to the podcast so they get fully indoctrinated into everything we're trying to preach with the fitness lifestyle that we advocate for. So anyway, you ready to get into this topic?
All right, let's do this. All right. So like we said, this is really these are some of the common faults that we see, but we want to talk about them because it allows you to not only stay safe in the gym first and foremost, but also like get the most out of these exercises. And that's why like in something like this competition that we just talked about that he's doing, that's why they have these standards, because this is, you want to work the full ranges of motion to get the most out of your exercise, also stay safe, and also make sure that like if you're like, okay, did you do 10 reps and I did 10 reps, these reps both need to be the same
Yeah.
reps.
And you might even, like, if you just were going to do one of the exercises that we're going to talk about and you've never done it before, you might go on YouTube or something or Google and search, how to do an air squat. And the result that comes up, number one, it might not actually be
The
proper form.
right.
And number two, just because you see somebody do an exercise and then you go do it on your own doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the awareness of whether or not you're moving the same way that that person is.
Yeah.
So the reason we're doing this in a podcast form is so next time you do these motions, you can listen back to this, take some notes, and be like, okay, here's what I'm going to watch for as I
Yeah.
video myself and watch myself do this back. Was I doing it
Right.
incorrectly, basically?
Yeah, like so the first one we're talking about is a squat. Sometimes people are just like, okay, I can squat down, squat back up, but or stand back up.
Yeah.
So the first one of the most common things that we see in a squat is that people's stance stand with their feet straight ahead. And what we want is our toes slightly pointed out with our heels about shoulder width. So we have two stances when we stand. We have a hip width stance, which is our more narrow stance, which is like for pulling things off the ground like a deadlift. And then we have our shoulder width stance where our heels are lined up about with our shoulders. It depends, it changes person to person, but about with our shoulders with our toes slightly pointed out. And this is for like our squatting movements.
I find that most people naturally will stand too narrow for a squat and then immediately just point their toes straight forward.
Out. And the reason that we want our toes slightly pointed out is that our knees track in line with our toes. So if our toes are pointed straight ahead, then our knees track in line with our knees are going straight out. And that really doesn't give our hips straightforward. It doesn't give our hips any room to descend.
Right.
And so we struggle with that range of motion. We struggle with like getting pushed, like our knees pushing really far over our toes when we squat. And so we're thinking, oh, I can't do the squat properly. But if we bring our feet out, turn our toes out, and push our knees out as we squat, you'll not only like, it'll make the squat so much easier, and you'll probably be able to descend into that full range of motion. And that full range of motion again is where our hip crease falls just below the crease of our knees.
Especially if we're talking about squatting a significant amount of weight on a barbell, this is even more important because when you take that wider stance and you point your toes out, like Blakely said, that allows you to push your hips back, which causes the hip joint to flex more, meaning you're shifting more of that work onto the muscles that open and close the hips, which are the glutes and other things too, but primarily the glutes. And those are the strongest muscles you have in your body.
Yeah.
So we want to get those muscles involved a lot in a squat.
We don't want to be putting that pressure on our knees.
Right. If you'd never paid attention to this and you immediately switch over to a more hip dominant squat versus a knee and quad dominant squat, not only are you going to be able to lift more weight, but your knees are going to be a lot happier and you're going to be able to lift more weight because now you're using more powerful muscles.
Yeah. So if you're realizing like, oh, I don't do this correctly, let me try it. A good way to practice is to squat to a target, to set a target. It can start higher, but eventually you want to get to that target to where your hip crease is just below where your knees crease. Sit down to a target, and that'll force you to push your hips back.
Yep.
And then make sure your toes are pointed out. And when you stand, you want to drive your hips off of that target instead of like letting your knees slide forward.
Yep.
We just actually in the training for everybody, we were doing some wall squats, and that's exactly what these wall squats are doing, is just to like reinforce these exact points of performance. So if you stand facing a wall and you squat, what this wall is going to force you to do is going to force your hips back. It's going to force your chest up. It's going to force your knees out to each side.
Yep.
And
how far away from the wall would you recommend standing?
I would start like, probably like 2 steps away, and then it end up to where you're just like 1 foot length away.
Yeah.
And if you can maintain all of those points of performance and not tip backwards.
Yep.
All right.
All right. I like that one.
Okay. Next one. Your deadlift stance should be hip width, which is our narrowest stance, with your toes slightly pointed out. So I think the the toes slightly pointed out on a deadlift is one thing that people don't do. And this is not like an excessive toe point out, like, it's just your
It's
toes
like 5 degrees.
slightly pointed out. And this again is room for your hips because we want to keep that bar path right along basically your shoelaces so that that bar stays in contact with our legs on the way up and on the way down. So pointing your toes out a little bit allows you to do that a little easier.
This is another one where if you just go on the internet and search how to deadlift, you're going to find all kinds of crazy versions of this. And I also blame like strongman competitions because those monsters that are deadlifting 1,000 pounds, they take a super wide
Like a sumo
stance.
stance.
Even if they're doing a conventional with their hands outside of their legs, they're just such big people
Yeah.
that they usually take a really wide stance with their toes pointed pretty forward. And I think a lot of men especially kind of see them do that and they're like, well, that must be the right way to deadlift. But another advantage to having your feet narrower on the deadlift is you're actually shortening the range of motion depending on your own anthropometry. This is kind of a person to person thing, but anyway, when you take the deadlift stance at hip width, it's probably going to feel a little bit narrower than you're used to. So I would video yourself from the front, the back, and from the side on this so you can get a really objective point of view.
Yeah. And so a quick little tip on how to find your hip width stance is to just hop in place up and down a few times. And when you do these little hops, your feet naturally fall into your hip width stance.
Yep.
So
That's a good tip.
part of our 5-step setup is like we have people just like if they're just beginning in this, hop a few times, and that puts their feet where their heels where they need to be, and then they just turn their toes out slightly.
Bonus tip on the deadlift: the bar never moves in the setup for the deadlift. You approach the bar, you get your grip, you get into position.
Yeah, we're going to that in number 3.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have looked ahead.
So number 3, we're still on the deadlift here. The deadlift setup starts with the bar directly over the middle of your foot. I often cue people to put the bar right over the shoelaces. Your shins will almost be touching the bar. So
And all this does is ensure that you're getting into a safe position with the weight over the center of balance of your body. If the weight is out in front of your toes, that's
Yeah.
one extra piece of leverage you have to overcome. And unfortunately, you're going to overcome it with your low back.
Yeah.
So we always want the bar path of the bar in the deadlift to be a completely straight up and down line. And if the top position is with the bar up against your thighs, standing directly over the middle of your foot, that's where it needs to start. So you
Yeah.
approach the bar, put it right over the middle of your foot, and it never moves from there.
Yeah, when you're learning about like human movement, you have like you see the body stretched out like this, and you think you're talking about your axes and stuff of where think objects should
Don't get
should
fancy.
move.
Don't get fancy
But
on us here.
like if you want to keep weight directly over your midfoot, but in a deadlift, think about where the bar is. The bar is in front of you, but in order to keep it as close to over the center of our body as possible, that's why he's talking about this. If you've got your feet narrow and you've got that bar right over basically your shoelaces, and when it travels up, it's going to go up in a straight line as close to your body as you can, touching your shins. That's why old school CrossFitters used to wear these long socks when they deadlifted, because they were scraping their legs and making them so tightly their shins were bleeding.
And if you're doing multiple reps of deadlifts in a row, this means that you have to put the bar down in the right
Yeah.
place too. So this is not in this tip, but as you initiate lowering the weight, if you squat down by bending your knees first, you're automatically going to have to push the bar out in front of you to get around your knees, which is going to put the bar down too far in front of you
Yeah.
for your next rep. So the downward descent has to initiate with pushing your hips back, keeping your knees out of the way so you can put the bar down right where it started from. And if you put it down and it's a little bit too far away, make sure you suck it back in to your shins using your
Before you
lats to
start that
sweep
next
it in
rep.
before you pull.
Yeah, if you just Google the 5-step deadlift setup, we have tons of videos on this. I don't want to go through the whole setup right here vocally, but I think that's a good thing to watch.
Agreed.
All right, 4th one. Your chest should be elevated in the bench press by pulling your shoulder blades together behind you. I think that this is one step that a lot of people who are untrained don't do in a bench press.
Even I would say uncoached.
Uncoached, yes. They lay back on the bench. They might steady their feet and they just kind of lay there like they're laying in a bed, and then they got a big weight to pull.
Somebody get my pillow. I remember when we learned the bench press at Starting Strength, like I'm pretty sure they said the bench is one of the most technical lifts, even though you might not think so because
Yeah,
you're just
because
laying there.
you're
But
not just laying there, but
there's
I
all
think that's the
right.
concept. People think, oh, we're just laying down.
Yeah, and a lot of people learn to bench back in like high school gym class, and I'm not sure that the coach knows the proper technique.
Yeah.
But yeah, puffing your chest up in the bench press by squeezing your shoulder blades behind you does a lot of good things for the amount of space that you have in your shoulder to complete a full up and down rep. If you lay back flat and don't push your chest up and squeeze your shoulder blades behind you, I'm acting this out for those of you guys not watching, you're much more likely going to let your elbows flare out to the side, especially as the weight gets heavy, and kind of push with the elbow out at 90 degrees, which is a really bad position for the shoulder to be in. Not that you're going to die if you do it one time, but over time you're going to start to wear more on the internal structures of the shoulder by closing the space up. You can just, try it right here wherever you are. Lift your elbow up at 90 degrees and then try to elevate your shoulder. It doesn't feel good in there. So doing that under a load is not a good idea. So elevating the chest shortens the bar path of the bench press a little bit, and it also lets you have the correct bar path, which we're going to get into in a little bit here too.
I'm going to add one little point to this one, so it's like 4B. Is that I don't think that it's in the list, but is that where your feet should be in a bench press? So your feet ideally should be where your heels are just behind the line of your knee. So if you picture yourself laying down on a bench, your feet are folded down, touching the floor, and your knees are out off the bench. So you want to pull your heel back just behind your knee, and you want your foot flat on the floor. So this creates like the base, like your stance, like. You wouldn't think it, but a bench press has a proper stance, and this is your proper stance for your bench press.
Think about if your heels were way out in front of your knees, and then you're trying to drive through your feet to create tension. You're going to scoot yourself back off the bench, or just not have any tension.
You're just not going to have any tension. And if I know this is a pain, but if you're too short for your feet to fit flat on the floor, you've got to put something there. You've got to lay down a plate. No tippy toe
like a dinner plate.
No, like another plate, like a 45-pound plate. No putting your tippy toes on the ground, and that's all that you're pushing off of.
Yeah.
So like at the gym, like commonly the girls' bench would have a pair of plates next to each side, so that women could flatten their feet on the floor. I know it can be a pain to do, but you got to do it.
I would say even like any guy that's not 5'9" or taller might need to do this. So
yeah, independent. Yeah, most benches are about the same height, but I know some are
within
a
an
little
inch.
higher. Yeah. All right. Number 5, the bar path in the bench press is not straight up and down. It's an arc towards your sternum.
Yeah. You should be aiming. Let's talk about the bench press setup a little bit more, because we're going to get into grip later, so I won't talk about that. Oh no, that's something else. Okay. When you unrack the bar for the bench press, the rep should start with your arms fully extended, with the bar directly over the shoulder joint. So you want to unrack the bar, come to a resting position with the bar directly over your shoulder, and that's the beginning and end of every rep. I think the instinct for a lot of people is to unrack the bar and immediately go into a rep. We don't want that.
Right.
As you unrack the bar, we want you to look, quote, through the bar at the ceiling. And whatever spot you kind of see through your peripheral vision there, that's your target for where the bar needs to end up, because we know that's directly over your shoulder joint. And then as you lower the bar...
Actually, let's back up real quick, because I think the whole piece of this hinges on where you're laying on the bar.
That's a good point.
Laying on the bench. So you lay back, and when you lay back, you want your gaze like just on the back side of the bar.
Just on the front side of the bar.
Just on the front side of the bar.
Towards your feet.
Towards your feet, yeah. So.
And one more thing with that, and that should be with the bar rolled all the way to the front of the clips on your bench. So then you lay down, get your gaze just on the foot side of your bar as you look up through it.
Yeah. So what this does is make sure that you're in the proper place on the bench to be able to rack and unrack it, but also far enough forward to where when you do unrack it, you're going to be able to successfully get those reps without clipping. Nothing irritates your bench press more than like hitting those clips. Throws you off balance, and that set is basically over.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead. So you've laid back, you've got your gaze, you unrack, and we steady the bar, and we get our gaze through the bar staring at the ceiling. We don't go immediately into that first rep.
And even before we get to that, we lift ourselves up off the bench slightly before we unrack the bar. We pinch our shoulder blades back together and puff the chest up. Then as we lower the bar, we're aiming for somewhere on our sternum, typically at or right above the nipple line. And what that does is put a slight arc in the bar path down towards the chest. What that lets you do is not only just drive the weight up into the air, but back towards your head as it goes up, which not only lets you keep your elbows in tight, which we talked about was good for the shoulders, but it allows you to use the muscles of the front of your shoulders too to get that slight arc back towards your head. So you're involving more muscle mass at the same time also.
For women, I'll have them go right at the bra, like basically your bra strap. Like have the bar
like where a sports bra would be.
Have the bar, contact your sports bra strap.
Yeah. So that's that.
And men can use that cue too.
Don't overemphasize this and like aim for your belly button. We're not trying to like turn this into a giant sweeping motion. But if you are going straight up and down with the bar, I can guarantee that your elbows are flaring out to the side, and you're not going to end up feeling very good in short order.
All right. Number 6, the ideal grip width for the bench press and the overhead press is when your forearm is vertical at the bottom of the rep.
That's a mouthful. What does that? Let's say it one more time.
The ideal grip for both the bench and the overhead press is when your forearm is vertical at the bottom of the rep.
Yeah.
Meaning straight up and down, not leaning toward horizontal. And I would say I'm one of the biggest faults on this for the overhead press is I'm like in basically a front rack position where I often catch myself where my forearm is almost horizontal.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot
quite that bad. But
I have a lot of flexibility there. I will. Like I'll look at videos and I'm like.
But actually, what you're talking about is not really affected by the grip width. You're just talking about where
elbows are.
The grip width is going to affect whether your forearm is leaned in or leaned out at the bottom of each of those reps. And going back to like the talk about axes and all that kind of stuff, and this is really what we learned in starting strength is paying attention to all the different leverage in every lift. Anytime you introduce what's called another moment arm, which is if you picture like a wrench on a nut, you're holding the wrench out at the end of the wrench, but the point where you're trying to apply force is all the way down at the other end of the wrench. So all the length of the wrench is leverage that you have to overcome, and they call that a moment arm. So the fewest number of moment arms you can introduce into a lift, the more efficient it's going to be. So when you're at the bottom of a bench press and you're about to be driving the weight up, if your forearm is not vertical, you've now created a whole nother moment arm that you have to overcome. That's bad leverage. Doesn't feel good either.
The best cue for this is where is the elbow in relation to the bar. So if we have our proper grip width, but we have our elbows like sneaking behind the bar, that is a huge thing to overcome before we even start our press. So I always cue people to have their elbow just slightly in front of the line of the bar, and don't let it sink like for the entire set. Don't let it sneak as it starts to get heavy and you're like on rep 4 and 5. Don't let that elbow sneak behind the bar, because that is so much to overcome before you even start the press. If you're just like, you can hold your hands out right now like you're holding a barbell, pull your elbows back and you're like, oh yeah, that's not a pressing position. But put your elbows forward just slightly of your hands and you're like, oh yeah, I can see how that's a better pressing position.
And then if like maybe you're thinking like, all right, well, how do I figure this out? Well, you're going to have to video yourself and see what angle your forearm is at the bottom of the bench
barbell coach
and press. But I can tell you right off the bat that almost everybody that we've coached in all these years is going to err on the side of going too wide with your grip. Most people are, I would say, about an inch to 2 inches too wide on their overhead press. There's some ducks walking by.
There's a herd of ducks walking behind us.
They're about an inch to 2 inches too wide on their overhead press, and they're about 2 to 3 inches too wide on their bench press. I don't know why, but for most people, on the overhead press, start with your finger somewhere near where the knurling on the barbell meets the smooth part as a good starting place. And then on the bench press, start about 2 finger widths outside of that spot. And that's a good place to start.
We have a good video on men's and women's grip width on the strict press. You can also YouTube.
No, you put it in the show notes if you
That's
remember
true. I'll
to.
put it in the show notes. But you can also, if you're on YouTube, like, proper grip width for a strict press digital barbell. I have a good one that goes through the men and women's grip, common grip
Yeah.
width. We learned this first time in starting strength, and I was way too wide before I went there, and then they had me go, like, for women they want one finger inside the smooth part of the barbell, and wow, that felt really narrow at first, but now as I've done it for years and years and years, I see why. Because again, you think about like where you're strong. Like if your arms are out like this and you try to press, you just feel it. You can tell that once you extend, you're gonna be like, your arms are gonna be like in this big Y, and you're not gonna have the strength. But again, if you think about the axis of your body and you put your hands in that more narrow width, and then you push your hands above your head, you're gonna be like, oh, my hands are stacked right over my shoulders,
Yep.
which are right over my heels. I'm gonna be pushing through this press all the way from the ground all the way through my body. I can see why I'm stronger in this position.
It's like less energy leakage, I think is
Yeah.
what they call it.
All right.
Here's this next one. This is a big pet peeve of yours.
The bottom range the bottom range of motion of the push-up is when your chest and stomach touch the floor.
We'll even be like doing a workout
And
together,
thighs.
and we've established on this podcast before that Blakely's hyper competitive, and I really don't care. But we'll be doing push-ups, and I'll be doing them perfectly, but she'll be watching me. You're not touching. You're not touching.
Is I've won push-up contests before against men when it was hand release versus not hand release. If you give a man a hand release push-up, which is when, and we've even talked about this on the podcast many times probably. If Austin Bear, if you're listening, you know. If you take your hands off the ground, you're laying flat on the floor. Your chest,
No
your
way to
stomach,
cheat.
your thighs are on the ground. If you just do push-ups and you don't know if you're getting to that range of motion, which is like, sometimes guys don't know if they're getting to that range of motion. Like, guys can just get into this rhythm and do tons of push-ups.
They do tons of quarter push-ups.
Tons of quarter push-ups. Actually, my first experience with this was back when we first started CrossFit. And
2009.
and we were at CrossFit Middle Tennessee, and he told me I had always done push-ups, just like the Rocky style push-ups. And he's like, okay, you need to like lay down on the ground and pull your hands up for just a little bit and then do your push-up. And I thought it was like some sort of like punishment. And I remember I did them, and he reminded me like the next week, and I was like, well, when can I stop doing them like this? Like, I thought I was like being punished for something, or like not punished, but just like I was training like
Yeah.
a certain muscle group, and as soon as I got strong enough, I was going to be able to do regular push-ups again. He's like, no, this is push-ups. Like, you lay down on the ground in between each rep. Like,
He didn't make you pick your hands up though?
no. He was just
Okay.
like, basically lay down on the ground and do your push-up. Lay down on your ground and do your push-up. And I was like, well, when can I just start to do regular push-ups again? He's like, these are push-ups.
Yeah. We like that show Hard Knocks, and they show all the football players out there like getting
And this
punished.
is why people don't know how to do push-ups. Rocky, every movie that you've ever seen, Brad Pitt and freaking that
Fight Club.
like everything. Like, people just do these little bitty quarter push-ups
Yeah. Why don't we want to do quarter push-ups?
because we're not working the full range of motion. We're not gaining strength in the full range of motion. And if you do full push-ups and then you go back to doing quarter push-ups, you're like, why did I ever do that? It is so much pressure on the top of the shoulder.
Yeah. And you typically, if you see somebody, okay, actually, that's going to get into the next one if I bring this up right now.
Oh yeah, if they do quarter push-ups,
Why don't we just go into number 8?
their elbows are flaring out 90 degrees to each side.
I guess we already hit on this one. Maybe we'll think of an extra one since this one's kind of spoiled already.
Well, it's good. It's a good note. So when we're doing our push-ups, our elbows are not at 90 degrees out to each side.
Yeah.
They're trending more toward our hips.
'Cause number 8
not tight into your body, but not flared out to each side.
somewhere around 45 degrees.
Yeah, I would say more than 45 degrees towards your hips, but not like super tight.
Because number 8 is bench presses and push-ups should be done with the elbows closer to your body versus flared out.
Yeah.
Amazing how so many of these things just carry over.
And like when you're writing up points of performance for something, and it is hard to like explain that one, honestly. Like when you say like point your elbows more towards your hips than out to each side. Like, I think it's hard. It's hard to visualize. Like,
think about
my
this.
elbows toward my hips. But
Think about if you were driving in traffic and you came across somebody who had a stalled out car and you pulled off to the shoulder and you were going to help them push the car out of the way.
Yeah.
How would you you would get close to the back of that car. What position would you put your arms in
Yeah,
to push it away?
you'd like
You
really
wouldn't
close to your body.
You wouldn't flare your elbows way out to the side and try to push the car. You'd keep them nice and
Yeah.
tight to your body and push from there. So
It is good to think about, like, this is why, like, these movements are functional movements, and because it's like it's good to, like, relate it to something functionally that you would do in everyday life and be like, how would I move then? And I should move that way.
This just reminded me of a funny story.
Uh-oh.
Your parents were visiting us, and we had finished doing a really hard workout. I think it was in the summer, and we sweat a ton. I mean, this was a super high volume arm and chest workout. And then we went out driving with your parents, and we came across these kids who were in a golf cart or an ATV or something, and they didn't have enough battery power to get up this hill. So Richard and I got out, and we were pushing them up this hill, and my triceps were so dang fatigued that just pushing the thing, I kept cramping. My triceps kept cramping, and I was like worthless. Even the slightest bit of pushing, I was like, oh, I'm dying here.
You were pushing that car in the with proper form.
But we got them like up this first hill, and then we're like, oh, there's another hill right behind this. How far away do you guys live? They're like, oh, we're like a mile. And I'm like, okay, here's our phone. Let's call somebody who can come and bring a battery charger over here.
Oh, goodness. All right. 2 more. Number 9. The range of motion for a full squat goes from standing at the top to hip crease below knee crease at the bottom.
Back to functional movement. I actually had a client who their doctor told them,
Me too.
I don't think you should be doing full squats anymore. You should probably stop about halfway down. And my question back to him was, well, what does he expect you to do when it's time to get out of a chair or get off the toilet if we haven't been training that full range of motion? Now, this guy's been training with me for 2 years, and he has plenty of strength to do this. I don't know why the doctor said this, because he's seen the way his body and health has changed over the last 2 years, but maybe he's insecure about his own fitness. But anyway, we train the full range of motion of a squat because that is the functional pattern that we need for everyday life. And it's the way to stay safe while you're doing it too.
Yeah. I mean, enough said. Like we talked about earlier, but if you squat to where you're not, below parallel, as they call it, you're putting that pressure on your knees. If you just do a quarter squat, you can feel it. Like your knees are what is changing you, the changing direction. You squat quarter way down, and your knees are in charge of changing you the direction to make you go back up. If you squat to where your hip crease is just below your knee crease, and everything else is going right, where your toes are slightly pointed out, your hips are going back, your posterior chain, all your biggest muscles of your body are the ones that are in charge of bringing you back up, and that's what we want.
You got a fully stretched hamstring at the bottom of the squat to help propel you back up.
We're all not doing squats over here for people to like take a second glance at our knees.
Have you seen the knees on that guy? Actually, I would imagine if you just trained partial range of motion squats, you'd probably end up with like a knee replacement eventually.
I mean, you all know I'm the biggest Rocky fan, but I also blame Rocky for this one.
Yeah. He's got some pretty poor squats.
He's got, first of all, he takes the rock, don't make me so, he takes the bar off the rack the wrong direction, forward in the rack. What is all that about? He does a couple quarter squats. Some dudes are standing like right there where they could get crushed by it.
They're gonna quote spot him.
And then he has to back it up into the rack, and then he's over there doing quarter push-ups. Come on, let's rewrite these.
Man, can he punch?
Sylvester Stallone.
That was number 9.
Let's
finish this up. Or we can just turn this into a movie review.
And y'all know I love Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah. It's been a while since we binge watched that.
Number 10, to engage your lats on rowing exercises. Love this one. Pull your hands towards your hips, not your ribs.
Sometimes
I give not your pits. I always say not your pits.
Sometimes I say nips.
Yeah, or pits. Pits, not your pits, but your hips.
Okay.
And not like excessively your hips.
Not your thigh.
Not your thigh.
Your waistband is a good place to pull towards.
But hips, not pits is a good way to remember it.
Okay, unless you're driving, do this test right now. Put your arm straight out in front of you. Take your other hand and reach around and touch your lat muscle on the arm that's extended. That's the muscle that's like back and below your armpit. Now I want you to pull your hand back towards you, but aim for your shoulder. So you're going to just pull it straight back. Your hand that's on your lat feels nothing. Now I want you to go back to that first position, and this time we're going to forget about what your hand is doing. We're going to drive your elbow back and down, pulling the hand towards the hip, and boom, that thing.
You just pulled it right. Look at this. It's right.
Look at my elbow.
It's right in line with your nipples.
Well, I can tell you
say
that
nipples on this podcast because that.
We'll put it explicit.
Don't watch what he's doing.
It's working. My lat is so fired up and huge right now. I haven't even lifted a weight yet today.
You're not good at demonstrating.
Well, I'm sitting in a chair.
Here, I'll show you. This one is nothing. I just made a. This one.
Yeah, there you go. That was a better demonstration.
Yeah, that was a much better demonstration.
Anyway, the point is that the reason we do rowing exercises is not to grow our forearms and not to get tendonitis in our elbows. It's to grow the strength, size, functionality of our lats.
Our pull-ups.
And pull-ups,
muscles.
yeah. So if you only do rows pulling the hand towards towards the armpit or the nips, you're really just working like the brachialis of your forearm. You really are going to end up with grip and elbow pain, and you're not going to be working the muscle that you're trying to work.
This is one of the most common things that we correct people on and have to repeatedly correct, I would say, is the row. And I even have, like, when we start, and actually we just kicked off sorry, we just kicked off the body program. People started this on Monday. Today's Wednesday, so they're rolling. And I have a video that says, like, dumbbell row, like, on day 2. Like, watch this video. This is how you correctly do a dumbbell row. I want to start you off on the right foot here.
Yep.
Because I don't want to see the first week go by and they're like are doing the rows wrong. Like, let's get the most out of this program. Do the rows right from the first.
And people way underestimate how much weight they're going to be able to row, and part of it is because they're using the wrong technique. If you're just relying on the strength of your forearm and bicep to do rows incorrectly, you're going to cap out pretty soon. But if you can get these giant muscles on the back of your armpit involved, I mean, it's not uncommon for women to be rowing 50 pounds, for men to be rowing 100 pound. I'm talking about one dumbbell in each hand, and you can work up to barbell rows where you're using significant amount of weight. And that's really where you start to see huge improvement to your pull-ups. And that's really where the shape of your back starts to change over time too, where you start to develop that V taper. It's from heavy rows. And if you're not involving the right muscles, forget about it.
Yeah. And so all this, trying to, sounds like tooting our own horn, but it's for a reason, because it's like, I think working with a coach or working with someone who has experience in watching people move is worth it, even if you're just going to do it for a small amount of time, so that you just have awareness. That what we hear so often is, like, people come into a program or people come in to be a custom client of ours and they're like, I've been working out for decades and no one's ever told me that I do a row wrong, or no one's ever told me that I'm not squatting correctly or doing a push-up right, or any of those things. And, like, even for example in the body program, I'm like, if you just watch all the videos that come with, like, in that first week, it's like, here's how to do the push-ups correctly, here's the common flaws on a row, here's how to pick up your dumbbells correctly without getting hurt. Like, we've just coached so many people in person over the years that we kind of know all these little things that we're going to see people do in that first week or two. So it's like, all right, let's get all this out of the way. Let's make sure you get the most out of this 8 weeks and start you off on the right foot. And that's overwhelmingly what we hear, is, like, people are like, no one's ever told me this before.
It's about making the most progress you can with the limited amount of time, money, resources you have, safely.
Yeah, safely.
I mean, that's what it's all about.
And it's kind of like what we invested in, a financial guy, because we were like, we want to make the most out of our money, make sure our money is doing the right work for us. Like, we want some help. 3 months with him or whatever, and we're like, okay, we feel good. Same thing with, like, hiring a coach. Like, I am going to work out for the rest of my life. This is part of my life now. Like, I want to make sure that I'm doing it correctly.
Yeah, make it count.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anything else? I wasn't trying to do a pitch there. I was just kind of came to me in the moment.
You're a good pitcher. All right. Well, we hope you guys got some value out of this. If there's something that we talked about and we confused you or weren't completely clear on something, just send us an email and we'll get back to you. We'll put our email addresses in the show notes for this, because every time I say them out loud, Blakely's like, nobody's going to remember how to spell my name. So look for that. All right. Thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you next week.
Right.